The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete expanse of Camp Pendleton as Staff Sergeant Elena Rodriguez stepped off the transport bus. Her boots hit the ground with a decisive thud, and she adjusted the strap of her gear bag across her shoulder. Around her, dozens of other Marines were arriving for the joint training exercise, their voices creating a low hum of conversation and nervous energy. Elena had been in the Corps for 8 years, but this was different. This wasn't just another deployment or training mission. This was the Advanced Marksmanship Initiative, a program designed to identify and train the military's most elite sharpshooters. Only the best received invitations, and Elena had earned her spot through years of perfect scores and field excellence. She made her way toward the registration building, passing groups of Marines who seemed to tower over her 5'4" frame. Many of them glanced in her direction, their expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed skepticism. Elena had grown accustomed to these looks over the years. In a profession dominated by men, her presence often drew attention, and not always the welcoming kind. The registration hall buzzed with activity. Long tables were set up where Marines checked in, received their room assignments, and collected training materials. Elena joined one of the lines, listening to the conversations around her. Most of the talk centered on previous training experiences, deployment stories, and speculation about what the next 2 weeks would bring. Behind her, she could hear 2 Marines discussing the program's reputation. "I heard they're bringing in some hotshot from Quantico," one of them said. "Supposed to be some kind of legend with a rifle." "Yeah, well, we'll see about that," his companion replied. "Talk is cheap. It's what you can do downrange that counts." Elena smiled to herself. She had heard similar conversations countless times before. Everyone had heard stories about exceptional marksmen, but until you saw someone perform under pressure, it was all just speculation. When she reached the front of the line, a young corporal looked up from his clipboard. "Name and unit, Sergeant?" "Staff Sergeant Elena Rodriguez, 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines," she replied, handing over her identification. The corporal scanned his list, found her name, and checked it off. "Welcome to AMI, Sergeant Rodriguez. You're in Building C, Room 247. Training begins at 0600 tomorrow morning. Don't be late." Elena nodded and took her room assignment card. As she turned to leave, she nearly collided with another Marine who was approaching the table. He was tall, probably 6'2", with the kind of build that suggested years of serious physical training. His uniform bore the rank insignia of a gunnery sergeant, and his chest displayed an impressive array of ribbons and medals. "Excuse me, Sergeant," he said, but his tone carried more dismissal than apology. His eyes swept over her briefly before he turned his attention to the corporal at the table. "Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Webb," he announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "I believe I'm supposed to be billeted in the senior NCO quarters." Elena paused for a moment, studying Webb's profile. She had encountered his type before, competent Marines who had achieved success and recognition, but who carried themselves with an air of superiority that rubbed her the wrong way. His dismissive glance hadn't gone unnoticed, and she filed the interaction away in her memory before continuing toward the exit. Building C turned out to be a standard military dormitory, clean and functional but hardly luxurious. Elena's room was small but adequate, with 2 single beds, 2 desks, and a shared closet. Her roommate hadn't arrived yet, so she had her pick of sides. She chose the bed near the window, which offered a view of the training ranges in the distance. As she unpacked her gear, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her here. Growing up in a small town in Texas, she had learned to shoot from her father, a Vietnam veteran who believed that everyone should know how to handle a firearm safely and effectively. What had started as weekend trips to the local shooting range had evolved into competitive shooting in high school, where she had dominated both regional and state championships. Joining the Marines after graduation had been a natural choice. The Corps offered structure, purpose, and the opportunity to serve her country while pursuing excellence in marksmanship. Her first assignment had been with a standard infantry unit, where her shooting skills quickly set her apart from her peers. Within 2 years, she had been selected for advanced training as a designated marksman, and her career had taken off from there. The door to her room opened, interrupting her thoughts. A young woman in marine utilities entered, carrying a sea bag and looking slightly overwhelmed. "You must be my roommate," the newcomer said with a smile. "I'm Corporal Sarah Chen." "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," Elena replied, standing to shake hands. "Good to meet you, Chen. First time at something like this? Is it that obvious?" Sarah laughed. "I've been shooting competitively since I was 12, but this is my first big military marksmanship program. I'm honestly a little intimidated." Elena appreciated the young Marine's honesty. "Don't be. You earned your spot here just like everyone else. The key is to focus on your fundamentals and not let the pressure get to you." As Sarah unpacked her gear, she chatted about her background and her hopes for the program. She had grown up in California, the daughter of immigrants who had worked multiple jobs to provide for their family. Shooting had been her escape and her passion, leading to a college scholarship and eventually to her current position as a designated marksman with the 3rd Marine Division. That evening, all the participants gathered in the base theater for an orientation briefing. Elena and Sarah found seats near the middle of the auditorium, which was filled with about 60 Marines representing units from across the Corps. The diversity of the group was striking. Young corporals fresh from their first deployments sat alongside seasoned staff sergeants and gunnery sergeants with multiple combat tours under their belts. At exactly 1900 hours, a figure strode onto the stage that commanded immediate attention and silence. Elena recognized him instantly, even though she had never met him in person. Rear Admiral James Harrison was a legend in military shooting circles, a former Navy SEAL who had transitioned to overseeing special operations training across all branches of the military. His reputation was built on both his personal achievements in combat and his ability to identify and develop exceptional talent. Admiral Harrison was tall and lean, with silver hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He wore his dress blues with the kind of bearing that spoke of decades of military service and absolute confidence in his abilities. His chest displayed an impressive array of decorations, including the Navy Cross, multiple Bronze Stars, and qualification badges that represented the pinnacle of military marksmanship. "Marines," the Admiral began, his voice carrying easily through the auditorium without amplification, "welcome to the Advanced Marksmanship Initiative. You are here because you represent the finest shooters in the Corps, individuals who have demonstrated exceptional skill and potential." He paused, allowing his eyes to sweep across the assembled group. Elena noticed that his gaze lingered briefly on certain individuals, as if he were already making assessments. "Over the next 2 weeks," Harrison continued, "you will be pushed beyond your current limits. You will face challenges designed to test not only your shooting ability but your mental toughness, your adaptability, and your capacity to perform under extreme pressure. Some of you will excel beyond your own expectations. Others will discover that they have reached the limits of their capabilities." The Admiral's words carried weight, and Elena could feel the tension in the room increase. This wasn't going to be a typical training exercise with predetermined outcomes. This was going to be a genuine test of each participant's abilities. "The military's operational environment is constantly evolving," Harrison went on. "Our enemies are becoming more sophisticated, our missions more complex, and the demands placed on our marksmen more challenging. We need shooters who can adapt to any situation, who can perform with precision under any conditions, and who can make the difference between mission success and failure." Elena found herself nodding slightly. She had experienced this evolution firsthand during her deployments. The days of static shooting positions and predictable engagements were largely gone, replaced by dynamic situations that required split-second decisions and absolute precision under chaotic conditions. "You will be evaluated constantly," the Admiral continued. "Every shot, every decision, every response to pressure will be assessed. At the end of this program, the top performers will be selected for advanced specialized training and assignment to elite units where their skills will be put to the ultimate test." He paused again, and Elena noticed several Marines shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The stakes were clearly higher than many had expected. "I want to be absolutely clear about something," Harrison said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "I don't care about your rank, your previous assignments, or your reputation. I don't care if you're male or female, if you're from the inner city or a small town, if you're a college graduate or a high school dropout. The only thing that matters here is performance. The only thing that will determine your success is your ability to place accurate fire on target under the most demanding conditions imaginable. Elena felt a surge of appreciation for the Admiral's words. Throughout her career, she had encountered individuals who made assumptions about her capabilities based on her gender or appearance. It was refreshing to hear a senior leader explicitly state that performance was the only criteria that mattered. As the briefing continued, Admiral Harrison outlined the structure of the program. The first week would focus on advanced shooting techniques, with emphasis on precision shooting at extended ranges, shooting from unconventional positions, and engaging multiple targets under time pressure. The second week would involve field exercises that simulated real-world combat scenarios, with participants evaluated on their ability to apply their skills in complex, high-stress environments. You will be divided into teams of 4, the Admiral explained. These teams will compete against each other in various exercises, but remember that this is ultimately an individual evaluation. Your teammates' performance will not determine your own success or failure. Elena glanced around the auditorium, wondering who she would be paired with. The composition of the teams could significantly impact the dynamics of the training, and she hoped to be placed with Marines who shared her commitment to excellence and professionalism. One final point, Admiral Harrison said as the briefing drew to a close. This program has a washout rate of approximately 30%. Not everyone who starts will finish, and not everyone who finishes will meet our standards for advanced selection. I encourage you to support your fellow Marines, but remember that you are ultimately competing for limited opportunities. The Admiral's words hung in the air as he left the stage, leaving behind an auditorium full of Marines who were beginning to understand the true nature of the challenge they had undertaken. Elena felt a familiar sensation in her stomach, the mix of excitement and nervousness that always preceded a significant test of her abilities. As the participants filed out of the theater, Elena overheard fragments of conversations that revealed the range of reactions to the briefing. Some Marines seemed energized by the challenge, while others appeared sobered by the Admiral's warnings about the washout rate and the intensity of the evaluation process. Near the exit, Elena noticed Gunnery Sergeant Webb talking animatedly with a group of other senior NCOs. His voice carried over the general conversation, and she caught part of what he was saying. "The old man talks a good game, but we'll see how tough this really is," Webb was saying. "I've been through plenty of advanced training programs, and most of them are more hype than substance. The key is to not let the mind games get to you." One of his companions nodded in agreement. "Yeah, and, let's be honest, some of the people here probably got selected more for diversity than actual shooting ability. It'll all sort itself out once we get on the range." Elena felt her jaw tighten slightly. She had heard variations of this conversation too many times to count, and it never failed to irritate her. The implication that her presence was the result of some kind of quota system rather than merit was both insulting and ignorant. Sarah, who had been walking beside Elena, apparently overheard the same conversation. "Jerks," she muttered under her breath. "Don't let it bother you," Elena advised quietly. "Let your shooting do the talking. That's the only response that matters." As they walked back toward their quarters, Elena reflected on the evening's events. The program was clearly going to be more challenging than she had anticipated, and the competitive atmosphere was already beginning to manifest. Admiral Harrison's emphasis on individual performance over rank or reputation was encouraging, but she knew that changing deeply ingrained attitudes would require more than just words. The next morning would bring their first actual training session, and Elena was eager to get started. She had spent years preparing for opportunities like this, and she was confident in her abilities. More importantly, she was ready to prove that her selection was based solely on merit and that she belonged among the Corps' elite marksmen. That night, as she prepared for bed, Elena cleaned and inspected her rifle with the methodical precision that had become second nature over the years. Her M40A6 sniper rifle was more than just a tool, it was an extension of herself, carefully maintained and intimately familiar. Every component had been inspected, adjusted, and verified countless times until the weapon performed with absolute reliability. The rifle represented thousands of hours of training, hundreds of thousands of rounds fired, and a level of dedication that few people could understand. Elena ran her fingers along the familiar contours of the stock, checking the scope mounts and bolt operation one final time before securing the weapon for the night. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of the most important test of her military career, and Elena was ready to meet whatever challenges lay ahead. Dawn came early at Camp Pendleton, with reveille sounding at 0500 hours. Elena had already been awake for 30 minutes, following her usual routine of reviewing her equipment and mentally preparing for the day ahead. The mess hall buzzed with quiet conversations as 60 Marines fueled themselves for what promised to be a demanding first day of training. Elena found herself sitting with Sarah and 2 other Marines they had met the previous evening. Corporal James Mitchell was a soft-spoken Texan with an impressive background in competitive shooting, while Sergeant David Park brought experience from multiple combat deployments in Afghanistan. The conversation was subdued but focused, with each Marine sharing their expectations and concerns about the program. At 0600 hours sharp, the participants assembled on the main parade ground where they were met by a team of instructors led by Master Sergeant Tony Rodriguez, no relation to Elena, despite sharing the same surname. The Master Sergeant was a compact, intense man with weathered features that spoke of years spent in harsh environments. His reputation as one of the Corps' premier marksmanship instructors preceded him. "Listen up, Marines," Master Sergeant Rodriguez called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Today begins your evaluation. Everything you do from this point forward will be assessed and recorded. Your attitude, your attention to detail, your ability to learn and adapt, it all matters." The group was divided into teams of 4, with Elena finding herself assigned to Team 7 along with Sarah, Corporal Mitchell, and Gunnery Sergeant Webb. Elena noticed the slight frown that crossed Webb's face when the assignments were announced, but he said nothing as they gathered together for their first team meeting. "All right, team," Webb said, automatically assuming leadership despite the fact that Elena outranked him in time and grade. "I've been through programs like this before, so I suggest we follow my lead. The key is to stick to proven fundamentals and not get caught up in whatever new techniques they try to teach us." Elena exchanged a glance with Sarah but decided to reserve judgment. Team dynamics would be crucial to their success, and starting with an argument would benefit no one. Their first destination was the precision rifle range, a facility that Elena had heard about but never seen. The range extended out to 1,200 meters, with targets placed at various distances and elevations. The setup was more complex than anything she had encountered in previous training, with environmental monitoring stations, advanced target systems, and observation positions for the instructors. Master Sergeant Rodriguez gathered the team leaders for a briefing while the other Marines prepared their equipment. Elena watched as Webb joined the group, noting how he positioned himself prominently among the more senior NCOs. When he returned, his expression carried the confidence of someone who felt he had insider knowledge. "Okay, here's the deal," Webb announced to Team 7. "We're starting with precision shots at 600 meters. Standard prone position, 10 rounds each, and they're looking for sub-MOA groupings. Nothing too challenging if you know what you're doing." Elena nodded, though she wondered why Webb felt the need to explain such basic parameters. Every Marine on the program would be familiar with precision shooting requirements, and the 600-meter distance was well within the comfort zone of anyone qualified to be here. As they moved to their assigned firing point, Elena began her pre-shooting routine. She checked the wind conditions, noting the subtle shifts in the grass and flags placed at intervals downrange. The morning air was relatively still, with only a light breeze from the southwest, but Elena knew that conditions could change quickly, especially as the sun rose higher and began to heat the ground. Webb went first, settling into a textbook-prone position behind his M40A6 rifle. His movements were confident and practiced, and Elena could see that he had indeed been through similar training before. His shooting position was solid, his breathing controlled, and his trigger manipulation appeared smooth and consistent. The first shot rang out, followed by 9 more in steady succession. When the range safety officer called for a ceasefire, Webb's target was brought forward for scoring. The grouping was impressive, 10 shots clustered within a 0.8-inch circle at 600 meters, well within the sub-MOA requirement. "Not bad for a warm-up," Webb commented with satisfaction, though Elena noticed he was careful to project his voice so that Marines from other teams could hear his result. Corporal Mitchell went next, producing a similarly tight grouping with 9 of his 10 shots clustered beautifully and 1 shot slightly outside the main group. His performance was solid and workmanlike, demonstrating the kind of consistent precision that marked a competent marksman. Sarah approached her firing point with visible nervousness, but Elena was pleased to see that her fundamentals remained sound despite the pressure. Her grouping was slightly larger than the first two shooters, but still well within acceptable parameters and showing good potential for improvement. Finally, it was Elena's turn. She moved to the firing point with the same calm efficiency she had developed over years of competition and training. As she settled into position, she was aware of Webb and several Marines from other teams watching her performance, some with obvious skepticism. Elena had learned early in her career not to let external pressure affect her shooting routine. She went through her mental checklist methodically: rifle position solid, natural point of aim confirmed, breathing rhythm established. The familiar weight of the rifle felt comfortable in her hands, and the scope picture was crisp and clear. Her first shot broke cleanly, the recoil pushing straight back into her shoulder. She worked the bolt smoothly, chambering the second round without disturbing her position. The second shot followed, then the third, each one feeling perfect as it left the barrel. Elena was vaguely aware of conversation around her, but she remained focused entirely on the shooting process. Shot after shot, her routine remained consistent: aim, breathe, squeeze, follow through, cycle the bolt. By the time she fired her 10th round, she felt confident that she had produced her best possible performance under the conditions. When her target was brought forward, the range fell notably quiet. Elena's 10 shots were clustered in a group that measured just 0.4 inches, half the size of Webb's already impressive grouping and the best performance of the morning thus far. "Outstanding shooting, Sergeant Rodriguez," Master Sergeant Rodriguez called out, making a note on his clipboard. "That's the kind of precision we're looking for." Elena simply nodded her acknowledgement and began cleaning her rifle, but she couldn't help noticing the change in atmosphere around her. Webb's expression had shifted from confident to something approaching surprise, while Marines from other teams were looking in her direction with newfound interest. "Lucky wind conditions," Webb muttered, though not quite loudly enough for the instructors to hear. The morning continued with progressively more challenging exercises. The teams moved to the 800-meter line, then to 1,000 meters, with each distance presenting new challenges in terms of wind reading, ballistic calculation, and precision requirements. Elena continued to perform at the highest level, consistently producing groups that were among the best of the entire class. What impressed the instructors most wasn't just Elena's accuracy, but her consistency. While other Marines had occasional excellent performances mixed with mediocre ones, Elena's shooting remained remarkably steady regardless of the conditions or pressure. Her wind reading skills were particularly notable, as she seemed to have an intuitive understanding of how environmental factors would affect her shots. During the lunch break, Elena overheard fragments of conversations that revealed how her performance was being received by the other participants. Some Marines expressed genuine admiration for her shooting ability, while others seemed to be looking for explanations that didn't involve acknowledging her superior skill. "She must have had access to better equipment," one Marine suggested to his teammates. "Maybe a custom barrel or special ammunition." "I heard she's been shooting competitions since she was a kid," another responded. "Probably had professional coaching that most of us never got." Elena found these conversations amusing rather than offensive. She had encountered similar reactions throughout her career, and she understood that some people needed time to adjust their preconceptions. What mattered was that the instructors were evaluating performance objectively, without regard to gender or any other irrelevant factors. The afternoon brought a new set of challenges designed to test the Marines' ability to adapt to changing conditions. The teams were required to engage targets from various positions: sitting, kneeling, standing, and several improvised positions using available cover and support. The targets were placed at random distances between 300 and 800 meters, and each Marine had to quickly determine the range, calculate the appropriate hold, and engage within a limited time window. This type of shooting was closer to what Marines might encounter in actual combat situations, where perfect prone positions and unlimited time for preparation were rarely available. Elena found this portion of the training particularly engaging, as it required the kind of quick thinking and adaptability that she had developed during her deployments. Webb continued to perform well, demonstrating solid fundamentals and good tactical awareness. However, Elena noticed that he seemed less comfortable with the more dynamic shooting positions, occasionally taking longer than necessary to settle into each position or appearing slightly rushed when the time limits pressured him. Elena, by contrast, seemed to flow naturally from one position to the next. Her years of competitive shooting had included extensive practice with positional shooting, and her combat experience had taught her to quickly find stable shooting platforms in less than ideal situations. She consistently engaged her targets within the time limits while maintaining excellent accuracy. As the afternoon progressed, it became clear that the competition was beginning to separate into distinct performance tiers. Elena was establishing herself as one of the top performers, along with a gunnery sergeant from 2nd Force Reconnaissance and a staff sergeant from the Mountain Warfare Training Center. Webb remained in the second tier, performing competently but not at the elite level required for the top spots. The final exercise of the day was designed to test the Marines' ability to perform under pressure. Each shooter was required to engage a series of targets while being observed by Admiral Harrison himself, who had appeared on the range without announcement during the afternoon session. Elena had noticed the Admiral's arrival but forced herself to maintain focus on the shooting tasks at hand. She was aware that this was likely a crucial evaluation moment, but she also knew that allowing the pressure to affect her performance would be counterproductive. When her turn came, Elena approached the firing point with the same calm confidence she had displayed throughout the day. Admiral Harrison was positioned just behind and to the side of her shooting position, close enough that she could sense his presence but not so close as to be distracting. The targets were arrayed at distances from 400 to 900 meters, with different point values assigned based on difficulty and distance. Elena had 90 seconds to engage as many targets as possible, with scoring based on both accuracy and the total points accumulated. As the timer started, Elena quickly identified the highest value targets and planned her engagement sequence. She began with the most distant targets, knowing that wind conditions might change and make those shots more difficult if she waited. Her first shot at 900 meters struck the center of the target, followed immediately by successful engagements at 800 and 700 meters. Working systematically closer, Elena maintained her rhythm while keeping track of her time. Each shot felt controlled and deliberate, with no sense of rushing despite the time pressure. She was dimly aware of Admiral Harrison making notes on a small pad, but she kept her attention focused entirely on the targets. With 15 seconds remaining, Elena engaged her final target at 400 meters and immediately began safing her weapon. When time was called, she had successfully engaged 12 targets out of a possible 15, accumulating the highest point total of any Marine that day. Admiral Harrison approached as Elena secured her rifle and prepared to clear the firing point. For the first time, she found herself face to face with the legendary officer whose reputation had preceded him. "Excellent shooting, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," the Admiral said, his voice carrying genuine approval. "That was textbook precision under pressure. Where did you develop that level of wind reading ability?" "Thank you, sir," Elena replied. "I've been fortunate to train in a variety of environmental conditions, and I've always made wind reading a priority in my practice sessions." Admiral Harrison nodded thoughtfully. "It shows. Keep up that level of performance, and you'll find some interesting opportunities ahead." As the Admiral moved on to observe other Marines, Elena felt a surge of satisfaction. The first day had gone better than she had dared to hope, and she had clearly made a positive impression on the program's senior leadership. However, she was also aware that first-day performances could be misleading. Some Marines performed well initially but struggled as the pressure increased, while others needed time to warm up to their full potential. The real test would come in the days ahead as the exercises became more complex and the competition more intense. That evening, as Team 7 gathered for their after-action review, the dynamics had noticeably shifted from the morning's initial meeting. Webb's automatic assumption of leadership was less pronounced, and he seemed more willing to acknowledge Elena's contributions to the team's overall performance. "Good shooting today, Rodriguez," he said, though his tone carried a note of grudging respect rather than enthusiasm. "You definitely surprised some people out there." Elena simply nodded her thanks. She had no interest in gloating or making Webb feel worse about his own performance, but she also wasn't going to minimize her achievements to make others more comfortable. Sarah was more direct in her congratulations. "That was incredible shooting," she said. I learned more watching you today than I have in months of regular training. How do you stay so calm under pressure? Practice, Elena replied simply. The more you expose yourself to pressure situations, the more normal they become. Competition shooting taught me that, and combat deployments reinforced it. As they discussed the day's events and prepared for the next day's challenges, Elena found herself looking forward to the increasing complexity of the program. The first day had been about demonstrating fundamental marksmanship skills, but she knew that the real tests were yet to come. The exercises would become more dynamic, more realistic, and more demanding in terms of decision-making under pressure. Elena was confident in her abilities, but she also understood that reputation meant nothing once the shooting started. Every day would require her to prove herself anew, and she was ready for that challenge. By the middle of the second week, the Advanced Marksmanship Initiative had evolved from a training exercise into something approaching actual combat simulation. Half of the original 60 participants had been eliminated through a combination of voluntary withdrawals and performance-based cuts. The remaining Marines represented the absolute elite of military marksmanship, and the competition among them had intensified accordingly. Elena had not only survived the cuts but had established herself as the program's standout performer. Her consistent excellence across every type of shooting challenge had earned her recognition from the instructors and grudging respect from her fellow participants. More importantly, she had caught the attention of Admiral Harrison, who had begun taking a personal interest in her development. The morning of Day 10 brought news that would transform the entire dynamic of the program. Master Sergeant Rodriguez gathered the remaining participants in the briefing room for an announcement that would raise the stakes beyond anything they had previously experienced. Marines, he began, his expression more serious than usual, we've just received word of a developing situation that requires immediate attention. This is not a drill or an exercise scenario. This is a real-world mission with actual operational requirements. The room fell silent as the implications of his words sank in. Elena felt her pulse quicken, not with nervousness but with the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with the prospect of meaningful action. Master Sergeant Rodriguez continued, approximately 18 hours ago, a group of humanitarian aid workers were taken hostage by an armed militia group operating in a mountainous region of an allied nation. The hostages include 3 American citizens, 2 of whom are military contractors with security clearances. Intelligence indicates they're being held in a remote compound that presents significant challenges for a conventional rescue operation. He activated a large display screen that showed satellite imagery of a rugged, mountainous landscape. The target compound was visible as a cluster of buildings perched on a rocky outcropping, surrounded by terrain that offered both natural defensive advantages and limited approach routes. The nature of the target location makes this a precision shooting mission, Rodriguez explained. The hostages are being held in a central building, with guards positioned at various points around the compound. Any rescue attempt will require the elimination of sentries at extended range to prevent them from alerting other guards or harming the hostages. Elena studied the satellite images carefully, noting the distances involved and the challenging angles that would be required for effective engagement. The longest shots would be in excess of 1,200 meters, with several positions requiring engagement from elevated or unconventional shooting positions. Here's where this affects your program, Master Sergeant Rodriguez continued. Admiral Harrison has been tasked with providing sniper support for this mission. Instead of pulling personnel from existing units, he has requested permission to field test the most qualified participants from this program. This represents an unprecedented opportunity to apply your training in a real-world scenario. The room erupted in murmured conversations as the Marines processed this unexpected development. Elena remained quiet, but her mind was racing as she considered the implications. This was exactly the kind of high-stakes mission that she had trained for throughout her career, and the opportunity to participate represented validation of everything she had worked to achieve. Admiral Harrison entered the briefing room, his presence immediately commanding attention and silence. His expression was grave as he addressed the assembled Marines. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I want to be absolutely clear about what we're facing. This is not a training exercise where mistakes result in poor scores. This is a combat mission where failure could result in the deaths of innocent Americans and the compromise of sensitive intelligence assets. He paused, allowing his words to sink in before continuing. I have been authorized to select a team of 4 snipers from this program to participate in the rescue operation. Selection will be based entirely on demonstrated performance under the most demanding conditions we can create. We have less than 36 hours to identify the team and complete mission-specific preparations. Elena felt her heart rate increase as she realized that this was the ultimate test, not just of marksmanship ability, but of the capacity to perform under life and death pressure in support of a real mission. The selection process will involve 3 phases, Admiral Harrison continued. First, precision shooting at extended range under adverse conditions. Second, tactical movement and target engagement in a simulated compound environment. Third, a comprehensive evaluation of decision-making ability under extreme pressure. He gestured toward the satellite imagery still displayed on the screen. The Marines selected for this mission will deploy within 48 hours to a forward operating base, where they will receive additional intelligence briefings and conduct final preparations before insertion into the target area. Elena glanced around the room, noting the expressions of her fellow Marines. Some appeared energized by the prospect of real-world action, while others seemed sobered by the gravity of the responsibility. Webb, she noticed, looked both determined and concerned, as if wrestling with the competing demands of ambition and apprehension. The first phase of selection began immediately. The remaining Marines were transported to a range complex that Elena had not seen before, a facility that replicated some of the most challenging shooting conditions imaginable. Targets were positioned at distances up to 1,400 meters, with shooting positions that required engagement from steep angles, unstable platforms, and positions that simulated the constraints of actual sniper hides. Weather conditions had deteriorated overnight, with gusty winds and intermittent rain creating additional challenges. Elena welcomed the adverse conditions, knowing that they would provide a more realistic test of each Marine's ability to perform when everything wasn't perfect. The shooting commenced with each Marine engaging targets in sequence, with instructors carefully documenting not just accuracy but also the time required to acquire targets, the stability of shooting positions, and the ability to adapt to changing conditions. Elena found herself in the third group, giving her the opportunity to observe the performance of others while maintaining her own readiness. Gunnery Sergeant Morrison from Force Recon performed exceptionally well, demonstrating the kind of fieldcraft and shooting ability that had made him a legend within the special operations community. His shots were consistently accurate, and his movement between positions was efficient and tactically sound. Staff Sergeant Williams from Mountain Warfare Training Center also performed admirably, showing particular skill in reading wind conditions and adjusting for the challenging environmental factors. His mountain warfare background was evident in his comfort with steep-angle shooting and his ability to quickly establish stable positions on uneven terrain. Webb's performance was solid but not exceptional. He managed to engage all his assigned targets, but Elena noticed that he seemed to struggle more than usual with the gusty wind conditions. His groups were larger than normal, and he appeared to be second-guessing himself more than she had observed in previous exercises. When Elena's turn came, she approached the first firing position with the focused concentration that had become her trademark. The wind was gusting from multiple directions, making precise wind calls particularly challenging. She spent a few extra seconds reading the conditions, noting the movement of grass and debris at various points downrange. Her first target was positioned at 1,200 meters on a steep upslope, requiring both precise elevation adjustment and compensation for the angle of engagement. Elena settled into her shooting position, confirmed her natural point of aim, and focused on her sight picture. The crosshairs settled on the target center, and she began her shooting sequence. The first shot struck exactly where she had aimed, despite the challenging conditions. She immediately began tracking to her second target at 900 meters, using a different shooting position that required engagement from a kneeling supported position. Again, her shot struck precisely where intended. As Elena continued through the course of fire, she found herself entering the zone of perfect concentration that all elite shooters recognized. External distractions faded away, leaving only the essential elements: target, crosshairs, wind, breathing, trigger control. Each shot felt inevitable, as if the bullet had already reached its destination before she even began to squeeze the trigger. By the time she completed the course, Elena had achieved something that impressed even the experienced instructors: perfect scores on all targets despite some of the most challenging conditions they had ever created for a selection exercise. Her performance was not just technically excellent but demonstrated the kind of unflappable consistency that marked the difference between good snipers and great ones. Admiral Harrison, who had been observing the shooting from various positions around the range, approached Elena as she completed her final safety checks. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," he said, his tone carrying unmistakable approval, "that was the finest display of precision shooting under adverse conditions that I've witnessed in 30 years of military service. How do you maintain that level of consistency when other excellent marksmen are struggling with the same conditions?" Elena considered the question carefully before responding. "Sir, I think it comes down to trusting your fundamentals and not trying to overthink the conditions. The wind is going to do what it's going to do. My job is to read it accurately, make the appropriate adjustments, and execute consistent fundamentals. Trying to fight the conditions usually makes things worse." The Admiral nodded thoughtfully. "Spoken like someone who truly understands the art of precision shooting. I'm looking forward to seeing how you perform in the next phase." The second phase of selection took place in a facility that had been constructed specifically to replicate urban combat environments. The compound was a maze of buildings, walls, and obstacles that required the participants to move tactically while engaging targets that appeared at unpredictable intervals and locations. Unlike the precision shooting phase, this exercise tested the Marines' ability to transition rapidly between different types of engagements while maintaining tactical awareness and making split-second decisions about target priority. Some targets represented legitimate threats that needed to be eliminated immediately, while others required careful identification to avoid simulated civilian casualties. Elena approached this phase with confidence, drawing on her extensive combat experience and the tactical movement skills she had developed during multiple deployments. The exercise began with each participant starting from different entry points, ensuring that no two Marines faced identical scenarios. As Elena moved through the compound, her training took over automatically. She flowed from one position of cover to the next, constantly scanning for threats while maintaining awareness of her overall position within the complex. When targets appeared, her engagements were quick and decisive, with no wasted motion or hesitation. The most challenging moment came when Elena encountered a scenario involving multiple targets at different ranges appearing simultaneously. A high-value target was visible at 600 meters through a narrow window, while two closer threats were positioned at approximately 200 and 350 meters respectively. The tactical situation required her to determine which target posed the most immediate danger and engage them in the appropriate sequence. Elena made her decision in a fraction of a second, engaging the closest threat first before transitioning to the medium-range target and finishing with the precision shot through the window. Her target sequence was tactically sound, and all three shots were delivered with lethal accuracy within a span of 8 seconds. By the time she completed the compound exercise, Elena had successfully engaged all assigned targets while avoiding any simulated civilian casualties and maintaining excellent tactical movement throughout. Her performance was smooth and professional, demonstrating the kind of operational readiness that separated training athletes from combat-ready warriors. The third and final phase of selection took place that evening in a conference room where the remaining candidates faced a series of ethical and tactical decision-making scenarios. These weren't written tests but rather simulated mission briefings where each Marine had to analyze complex situations and make recommendations about courses of action. The scenarios were designed to test judgment, tactical thinking, and the ability to operate effectively under moral and operational pressure. Elena found this phase particularly engaging, as it required her to draw not just on her shooting skills but on her broader military experience and understanding of operational constraints. One scenario involved a hostage situation where intelligence indicated that immediate action was required to prevent execution of captives, or weather conditions made precision shooting extremely difficult. Another presented a situation where mission success could be achieved through either a high-risk direct action approach or a more methodical strategy that might allow targets to escape but minimize the risk of civilian casualties. Elena approached each scenario systematically, analyzing the available information, identifying key constraints and opportunities, and presenting her recommendations with clear reasoning. She was particularly careful to address the ethical dimensions of each situation, demonstrating her understanding that military effectiveness must always be balanced against legal and moral considerations. As the evaluation concluded, Admiral Harrison addressed the exhausted but expectant Marines who had made it through the entire selection process. "What you have accomplished over the past few days represents the highest standard of military excellence," he began. "Every one of you has demonstrated capabilities that mark you as elite warriors. However, this mission requires a specific combination of skills, temperament, and experience that not every excellent Marine necessarily possesses." Elena felt her stomach tighten as she waited for the results. She was confident in her performance, but she also understood that mission selection involved factors beyond pure shooting ability. The team that will deploy in support of this operation consists of 4 Marines who have demonstrated exceptional performance across all evaluation criteria, Admiral Harrison continued. Gunnery Sergeant Morrison, Staff Sergeant Williams, Corporal Chen, and Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. Elena felt a surge of satisfaction and relief as her name was announced. Sarah's selection was particularly gratifying, as Elena had watched the young Marine develop confidence and skill throughout the program. The team composition looked strong, with a good balance of experience and complementary capabilities. As the other Marines were dismissed with congratulations and assurances that their performance had been noted for future opportunities, the selected team members were asked to remain for initial mission briefings. Elena noticed Webb approaching as she gathered her gear. His expression was complicated, part disappointment, part respect, and part something that might have been understanding. "Congratulations, Rodriguez," he said, extending his hand. "You earned this, and I hope I never have to admit again how wrong my first impressions can be." Elena shook his hand, appreciating the gesture. "Thank you, Gunny. Your performance was outstanding throughout the program. I'm sure there will be other opportunities." As Webb walked away, Elena reflected on how dramatically their relationship had evolved over the course of 2 weeks. What had begun with barely concealed skepticism had transformed into professional respect, and she found that transformation more satisfying than any individual shooting achievement. The real mission was about to begin. The forward operating base was a study in controlled chaos. Located in a mountainous region that Elena couldn't name due to operational security requirements, the facility buzzed with the activity of a major rescue operation in its final planning stages. The selected sniper team had arrived 12 hours earlier and had spent every waking moment since then, immersed in intelligence briefings, mission rehearsals, and equipment preparation. Elena found herself in the unusual position of being both the lowest-ranking member of the team and its acknowledged technical leader. Admiral Harrison had made it clear during the mission briefings that while Gunnery Sergeant Morrison would serve as team leader for tactical purposes, Elena's exceptional marksmanship abilities made her the primary shooter for the mission's most critical engagements. The target compound sat on a rocky prominence approximately 2,400 meters from the nearest feasible sniper position. Intelligence updates had revealed that the hostages were being held in a stone building at the center of the compound, with guards positioned at 4 key observation points around the perimeter. The rescue plan called for simultaneous engagement of all 4 guard positions to prevent any warning from being raised before the assault team could breach the compound. Elena studied the updated satellite imagery and drone reconnaissance footage with the intensity of someone whose performance would determine whether innocent people lived or died. The longest shot would be approximately 1,350 meters to a guard position on the opposite side of the compound, while the shortest would be just over 800 meters to a sentry post near the main gate. What made the mission particularly challenging was the timing requirement. All 4 guards had to be eliminated within a window of no more than 15 seconds to prevent any of them from raising an alarm. This meant that the sniper team would need to coordinate their engagements with split-second precision while accounting for the different flight times of bullets traveling varying distances. Gunnery Sergeant Morrison gathered the team around a detailed terrain model that intelligence specialists had constructed based on the latest reconnaissance information. His weathered face was serious as he outlined the final mission parameters. "Insertion will be by helicopter at a landing zone approximately 8 kilometers from our shooting position," he explained, pointing to various features on the model. "We'll move overland under cover of darkness to establish our hide site here, on this ridgeline overlooking the target." Elena studied the approach route carefully. The terrain was challenging but manageable, with good concealment opportunities and multiple fallback positions if the team was discovered during movement to their final position. Weather forecast is favorable, Morrison continued. Clear skies, light winds from the southwest at 5 to 8 knots. Temperature will be dropping throughout the night, so we need to account for the effects of changing atmospheric density on our ballistics. Staff Sergeant Williams nodded, consulting the data book where he had recorded detailed ballistic calculations for the expected conditions. As the team's designated spotter and secondary shooter, Williams had spent hours computing firing solutions for every possible engagement scenario. The assault team will begin their final approach exactly 30 minutes after we confirm that all guards have been eliminated, Morrison explained. That gives us a narrow window to accomplish our mission and, then, provide overwatch for the rescue operation. Elena felt the familiar pre-mission sensation of heightened awareness and controlled tension. Every detail mattered now, from the precise adjustment of her rifle scope to the exact placement of her shooting mat. She had spent the previous evening double-checking every component of her equipment, verifying that her rifle was perfectly zeroed and that her ammunition was sorted according to the most exacting standards. Corporal Chen, despite being the youngest and least experienced member of the team, had proven herself invaluable during the mission preparation phase. Her task would be to maintain communications with the command element and coordinate the precise timing of the engagements. Her calm professionalism under pressure had impressed even the seasoned special operations veterans who were supporting the mission. As the sun set behind the mountains, the team conducted their final equipment checks and prepared for insertion. Elena's M40A6 rifle had been equipped with a specialized long-range scope and loaded with match-grade ammunition that had been individually selected for consistency. Every round had been measured and weighed to ensure identical ballistic performance. The helicopter ride to the insertion point was conducted in complete darkness, with the crew using night vision equipment to navigate through the mountainous terrain. Elena found herself reviewing the mission timeline in her mind, visualizing each engagement sequence and mentally rehearsing the precise movements that would be required during the critical moments of the operation. The landing zone was a small clearing barely large enough to accommodate the helicopter. As the team unloaded their equipment and prepared to begin their approach march, Elena felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. 3 American lives depended on her ability to deliver perfect shots under the most demanding conditions imaginable. The movement to their final position took 4 hours of careful navigation through rocky, uneven terrain. The team moved in tactical formation, with Morrison leading and Elena bringing up the rear as the primary shooter. Their progress was slow but steady, with frequent stops to check their position and confirm that they remained undetected. As dawn approached, the team reached their designated hide site, a natural depression on the ridgeline that provided excellent concealment while offering clear lines of sight to the target compound. Elena immediately began establishing her shooting position, carefully arranging her equipment to ensure maximum stability and comfort during what might be an extended period of observation. The target compound was visible in the distance, a cluster of stone buildings perched dramatically on its rocky outcropping. Through her scope, Elena could see the guard positions that intelligence had identified, though the guards themselves were not yet visible in the pre-dawn darkness. Williams established his spotter position alongside Elena, setting up a high-powered spotting scope that would allow him to observe bullet impacts and provide wind corrections during the engagement. Chen positioned herself where she could maintain communication with both the team and the command element while remaining concealed from potential observation. As the sun rose, the compound began to show signs of activity. Guards emerged from their shelters and took up positions at the designated observation points. Elena used the growing daylight to study each target carefully, noting their movement patterns and identifying the precise aiming points that would ensure immediate incapacitation. The morning passed slowly as the team maintained constant observation of the target. Elena made continuous adjustments to her rifle scope, accounting for the changing atmospheric conditions as the sun heated the air and altered the density through which her bullets would travel. Williams called out periodic wind readings, noting the subtle shifts in direction and velocity that could affect long-range accuracy. At 1,400 hours, Chen received the message that everyone had been waiting for: execute, execute, execute. Elena felt her heart rate slow as she entered the zone of perfect concentration that marked the beginning of a critical engagement. Her breathing became deep and controlled, and her vision seemed to narrow until only the target and her crosshairs existed. "Wind is 3/4 value from the left at 6 knots, Williams called quietly. "Target distance confirmed at 1,347 meters. Elena made a final adjustment to her scope and settled into her shooting position. Through her optic, she could see her assigned target clearly, a guard positioned behind a low stone wall with his rifle resting casually across the barrier. He was facing away from the compound, scanning the approaches for potential threats, completely unaware that death was already reaching toward him across more than a kilometer of empty air. "On target," Elena whispered. "Send it," Morrison commanded. Elena's rifle recoiled smoothly against her shoulder as the carefully placed shot broke with surgical precision. Even before the bullet reached its target, she was cycling the bolt and acquiring her secondary target, a guard position 950 meters away near the main entrance to the compound. Through his spotting scope, Williams watched the first bullet strike exactly where Elena had aimed. "Hit, center mass, target down," he reported calmly. The other team members were engaging their assigned targets simultaneously. Morrison's shot at 1,100 meters struck home just as Elena's second bullet found its mark. Chen, using a precision rifle borrowed from Williams, successfully engaged the closest target at 800 meters. Within 12 seconds of the first shot, all 4 guards had been eliminated with clinical precision. The compound showed no signs of alarm, confirming that the coordinated engagements had been successful in preventing any warning from being transmitted. "All targets neutralized," Morrison reported to the command element. "Compound is secure for assault team approach." Elena maintained her focus on the compound through her scope, now serving as overwatch for the rescue operation that was about to unfold. The assault team would need approximately 25 minutes to reach the compound and execute the hostage rescue, during which time the sniper team would provide early warning of any threats and eliminate any additional guards who might appear. The rescue operation proceeded with clockwork precision. Elena watched through her scope as the assault team moved through the compound methodically, clearing buildings and neutralizing any remaining threats. When the hostages were located and secured, she felt a wave of relief and satisfaction that went beyond personal achievement. Hostages secure, all personnel accounted for, came the radio transmission that marked the successful completion of the mission. "Prepare for extraction." The return journey to the extraction point was conducted with the same careful attention to tactical movement that had marked their initial approach. However, Elena noticed a different atmosphere within the team. The successful completion of their mission had created a bond that went beyond professional respect into something approaching reverence for shared accomplishment under the most demanding circumstances. Admiral Harrison was waiting at the forward operating base when the team returned. His expression as he debriefed them conveyed both professional satisfaction and personal pride in their performance. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said as the formal debriefing concluded, "you have just participated in one of the most technically demanding sniper missions in recent military history. Your performance exceeded every expectation and standard we could have established." He paused, looking directly at Elena before continuing. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, your shooting today saved American lives and demonstrated a level of precision under pressure that represents the absolute pinnacle of military marksmanship. I am recommending you for immediate promotion and assignment to our most elite special operations units." Elena felt a surge of emotion that she carefully controlled. The recognition was gratifying, but more important was the knowledge that her performance had contributed to the safe recovery of innocent hostages. 2 weeks later, back at Camp Pendleton, the Advanced Marksmanship Initiative concluded with a graduation ceremony attended by senior leadership from across the military. Elena found herself standing before an assembled group of Marines, receiving not only recognition for her individual performance but also serving as an example of the Corps' commitment to identifying and developing excellence regardless of any factor other than demonstrated ability. Admiral Harrison delivered the keynote address, using Elena's story as an illustration of the military's evolving understanding of what constituted elite performance. When Staff Sergeant Rodriguez arrived at this program, he said, some individuals questioned whether she belonged among the Corps' most elite marksmen. Her response was not to argue or complain, but simply to demonstrate through performance that excellence has no gender, no physical prerequisites other than the ability to deliver precise fire under the most demanding conditions. Elena noticed Gunnery Sergeant Webb in the audience, his expression one of genuine respect and, what might have been gratitude for the lesson in not judging capability by appearance. The mission we completed last week required the highest levels of technical skill, tactical awareness, and mental toughness, Admiral Harrison continued. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez delivered performance that exceeded even our most optimistic expectations, proving that our military strength lies not in preconceptions about who can serve in elite roles, but in our commitment to identifying and utilizing the best talent available, regardless of any other consideration. As the ceremony concluded and Elena prepared to report to her new assignment with a classified Special Operations Unit, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The skepticism and doubt she had encountered along the way had been frustrating at times, but ultimately irrelevant. What mattered was performance when it counted most, and she had proven herself capable of delivering excellence when lives depended on her abilities. Sarah approached as Elena was packing her gear for departure. The young Marine's confidence had grown dramatically throughout the program, and she was preparing to report to her own new assignment as a designated marksman with an elite infantry unit. "I wanted to thank you," Sarah said simply. "Watching you perform under pressure taught me more about what's possible than years of regular training ever could have." Elena smiled, remembering her own early days in the Corps when she had looked for role models who could show her what was achievable through dedication and excellence. "Just remember," Elena replied, "your performance speaks louder than anyone else's preconceptions. Focus on being the best Marine you can be, and everything else will take care of itself." As Elena departed Camp Pendleton for her new assignment, she carried with her not just the satisfaction of personal achievement, but the knowledge that her success had opened doors for other Marines who might face similar challenges. Excellence, she had learned, was not about proving doubters wrong, it was about proving to yourself and your teammates that you could deliver when it mattered most. The mission had been accomplished, but Elena understood that in many ways, her real work was just beginning. In her new role with Special Operations Forces, she would face even greater challenges and higher stakes. But she was ready for whatever lay ahead, confident in her abilities and committed to the same standard of excellence that had brought her this far. Admiral Harrison's final words to her echoed in her mind as she prepared for the next chapter of her career. "You didn't just exceed our expectations, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. You redefined what we thought was possible. That's the mark of a true elite warrior." Elena smiled as she shouldered her gear bag and walked toward her new assignment. The doubters had been silenced not through argument or confrontation, but through the simple demonstration that excellence recognized no boundaries other than those imposed by dedication, skill, and the courage to perform when everything was on the line.